faulting that man. Now, it means that there is a level of understanding that the king expects everybody in the kingdom to have, whether you are poor or rich, whether you are literate or not. The Bible tells us in the book of Genesis that when King Pharaoh sent for Joseph, Joseph did not appear the way he was. The Bible says that Joseph went and shaved himself, took off his prison clothes, and wore new garments. Why? Because there are protocols for approaching the king. Now, the king assumed that if you have been living in this kingdom long enough, you should understand that there is a soul qualifier. There is an ultimate requirement for you to stand in my presence. And I will not under any guise make excuse for you. There is only one thing for you: judgment, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then you want to ask yourself, would it not have been better if that man had just stayed outside? Sincerely, really, if it was you, wouldn't it be better? Because which kind of wahala be this now? A day before I dey work, they talk to make a contract. OYELEYE is available, and I am here, and the Bible says that the king did not make excuse for him because he was not wearing the proper clothes. For everyone that is going to SOAR in this conference, in this excellence conference that we are having, there is a soul qualifier. There is an ultimate requirement that you must have. And if you do not have it, there is no way that you are going to fly with us. And that was why we sang that song when we began. I have 15 more minutes. I may not be able to cover everything that we have. I hear that we have 2 services. Wherever we stop here, we're going to stop and we're going to continue. I'm going to crave your indulgence to join us online for the second part. Are we together? That parable that we have just looked at is an exemplification of what God intends to do in this meeting. God has called all of us to come, and He is ready to make us SOAR. The Bible says that He has prepared a feast of fat things. The Bible says, the king said, all things are ready. Just call everybody to come. But everybody must have the wedding garment. And that is what we are going to look at in the short time that we have. What is this wedding garment? What is this soul qualifier that Jesus requires that everyone who is going to SOAR in this conference must have? Mark chapter 3, verse 13 to 15. Let's read that quickly. Mark chapter 3, verse 13 to 15. The Bible says, and he goeth up into a mountain and called unto him whom he would, and they came unto him. And he ordained 12 that they should be with him, that he might send them forth to preach, and to have power to heal diseases, to heal sicknesses, and cast out devils. So, we see Jesus calling a set of people again to himself. Just like that great king called people to a feast. The Bible says that Jesus called certain men to himself. Now, the goal was that he was going to send them to preach. Now, the moment that he called them, he did not send them to preach. The Bible says he did what? He called them to be with him first. So the first thing that we see here is that there is a call to fellowship. That's our first outline. There is a call to fellowship. If Jesus was, for example, the Bible says in the book of Genesis, do we have this time? Let's try and run through it. The Bible says in the book of Genesis that God created the heavens and the earth. And the Bible says that God rules in the heavens, and the earth he has given to the sons of men. Now, the plan of God from creation was to make earth a colony of heaven. Are we together? what God was trying to do, the Bible says, Jesus said, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So the plan of God is that earth will look like heaven. The plan of God is that everything that you see in heaven, you will see on earth. Now, it takes God to make heaven heaven. Is that true? Now, if it takes God to make heaven heaven, it will also take God to make earth earth the way he wants it to be. Is that true? So now, in achieving that, God makes man in his own image. Because the only way that God can achieve heaven on earth is if he himself is dwelling on earth to make it like heaven. So God does not hold back, and God is not insecure. He makes man exactly like himself. Now, the only thing that God did not give man was the knowledge of good and evil. Every other thing that God gave man was every other thing that he had. And the reason that God made it so was so that as powerful as he was, man would be as powerful, and then they could replicate the same things. So God said, let us make man in our own image, in our likeness, and let them have dominion. The word replenish there is the word replicate. It means make exact prototype of what you see. Are we together? So the plan of God was to make earth a colony of heaven. Now, so we see Jesus introduce the same concept, that if I am going to send you to preach the gospel, I am going to need you to do it the same way that I will do it. So Jesus calls them primarily to send them to preach, but he doesn't send them to preach first. He calls them to fellowship. Now, what is the goal of fellowship? Transformation. Write that down. The ultimate goal of fellowship is transformation. The Bible says in the book of Matthew that when they came to arrest Jesus, they could not determine who he was. Why? He and his disciples were already looking the same. So it means that over a space of 3.5 years, there had been a serious level of intercourse and fellowship between Jesus and his disciples, that they were now looking like each other. That he had to take somebody that was an insider to recognize who Jesus was. There is an adage in the Yoruba tribe. Thank God we have our Magbambi by. The more they stayed with Jesus, the more they began to look like him. Look, I just rounded off my project in the university, and I have only one advice for anybody that intends to get a first class. See, people say put God first. If you put God first, you can still end up with a pass. The single most important thing that you need to get a first class is to have the right friends. That's all. You don't need to pray. You don't even need to read. Just go and get 5 first class friends. You will be a first class graduate. Because when they are going to class, they will drag you. When they are going for night class, they will drag you. And this was the concept that Jesus introduced when he brought them into fellowship with him. His plan was that they would go and preach the gospel, but they needed to be like him first. And over a space of 3.5 years, they were looking exactly like Jesus. And that is going to lead us to the second outline that we have this morning. What is the first test for soaring? What is the first test that you must pass for you to be qualified to soar? Now, remember that I told you that there is a soul qualifier. But before we even get to the soul qualifier, there is a test that you must pass first. It is the test of knowledge. Write it down. The first test that you must pass for you to qualify for the soaring in this conference is the test of knowledge. Now, what was the... No, you know, we started by saying that... Please let me check my time. All right. We started by saying that Jesus was going to send out certain people to preach the gospel, but he needed them to be like him, so he called them to fellowship first. And then the goal of that fellowship was transformation. Now, what was the subject, or let me say, what was the instrument of transformation? It was knowledge. The Bible says in the book of Romans chapter 12, from verse 1 to 2, Romans chapter 12 from verse 1 to 2, the Bible says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. It says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. How do we renew our minds? Information. Are we still together? The primary instrument or the primary instrumentation of renewal is information. So we see that the way that Jesus renewed their mind, or the way that Jesus transformed them, was by the knowledge that he gave them. The Bible says, Jesus himself speaking, he says that all these things to them that are outside, they are like parables. He says, but to you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom. So we see Jesus speaking in parables to those that were outside. But when he came into the inner carcass, Jesus did not speak in parables. He spoke in clear terms that they could understand. Because that was the instrument of transformation that they needed. There is no way that you can soar with God if you don't know him. The Bible says in the book of Daniel, it says that they that know their God, they shall be strong and they shall do exploits. The knowledge of God is the ultimate source of light that propels our flight. I want us to read Matthew chapter 17, verse 1. All right. Okay, because of time, I'll just tell us the story that is there. Matthew chapter 17. The Bible says that at a point in time, now, are we still together? All right. So we see Jesus communicating in parables to those that were outside. And then we see him explaining to the 12. Remember that we said in Mark chapter 3 that he called 12 to himself. And then he was explaining those things very clearly to them. But we see again in Matthew chapter 17 that there were 3 people that were in the inner circle of Jesus. The Bible says there were Peter, James, and John. Now, these people had a different knowledge of who Jesus was. Now, the Bible says that they were on that mountain, and suddenly before their eyes, Jesus began to be transfigured. His face began to shine as light. The Bible says they saw Esaias and Elias representing the law and the prophets. And the Bible says that a voice came from heaven saying, "This is my beloved son, in whom I am pleased. Hear ye him." Now, the other disciples did not have that encounter. So you see that this transformation and this knowledge thing that we are talking about is in levels. Now, there are some of us that are not born again. See, you have not even started. You are not born again. You have not even matriculated into the school of eagles. You can't fly. You are still roaming with the chickens. You know what they do to chickens? What do we like to do to chickens? Chicken Republic. Eh? Chicken and chips. The best thing to do with a chicken is what? Chicken and chips. You don't do chicken and chips with an eagle. Thank you. Hello? You don't do chicken and chips with what? With an eagle. No. If by chance you are able to capture an eagle, it's a specimen. You don't kill it. No, you don't do that. But many of us, we are still operating in the level of chicken. And that's why Satan is using us for chicken and chips. No, it's not me that said it, though. If you are not born again, you have not even matriculated into the school of eagles. You are still playing with the chicken. Anybody can just grab you at any time. So the first step in this knowledge thing is that you are even first born again. You have to be born again. That's even the beginning. So if you are not born again here, I want you to be preparing your heart. Because as I'm rounding off now, I'm going to make an altar call. If you have not been born again, you need to be born again today and leave Chicken and Chips Republic. I'm going to say one more thing, and I'm going to round off. I'm sorry that I've taken the time of our first time thing. I'll quickly read from verse 13. The Bible says, when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, He asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, some say that thou art John the Baptist, some say Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said unto them, whom say ye that I am? Now remember that in Matthew chapter 17, Peter, James, and John saw Elias. Is that true? So can they confuse Jesus with Elias? No way. Why? Because there is a special knowledge that they have, that Jesus is not Elias. Neither is Jesus Esaias. That means Jesus is not Elijah. Neither is he Isaiah. Now, Jesus now said, okay, who do you say that I am? The only person that could answer that question of knowledge, that could pass that second test of knowledge, was who? Simon Peter. Why do you think he was able to answer? John said, the things that our eyes have seen, the things that we have heard, the things that our hands have handled of the word of life, you can't tell us otherwise. We have seen it. Peter said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven has revealed it to you. And what was the next thing? He says, upon this rock, I will build my church. Now, there are many theologians and theological theories that say that Jesus did not mean that Peter was the church and all of that. Fine. But as time goes on, we see that Peter became the head of the church. So it was only Peter that passed that test of knowledge. And that was the first thing that qualified him to become somebody that could head the church. Until you pass the test of knowledge, you are not ready for the flight. Some of us don't even know God at all. And we are asking to soar. You cannot soar. Chickens don't soar with eagles. It's an anomaly. It is an anomaly. You must pass the test of knowledge. You must. Do you know God? You cannot know God. Okay, let me just give you an expo into what the soul qualifier is. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 1. It says, and Solomon, 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 3. It says, and Solomon loved the Lord, and he offered 1,000 burnt sacrifices on Mount Gibeon, which was the highest mount in Israel at the time. You cannot know God and not love God. It's not possible. And it is the only lovers of God that are qualified to soar with God. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, let's rise to our feet now. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, the Bible says that eyes have not seen. It says that ears have not heard. It says that minds have not conceived the things that God has in store for them that love him. The soaring that God has prepared is for them that love him. The only way that you can qualify to soar in this conference and in life is by an unquenchable love for God. But you must first pass the test of knowledge. Wouldn't it be madness for me to tell you that I love somebody that is in Florida and I don't know them? Is it not madness? I say, oh, there's this lady in Florida, her name is Jane. I don't know her, but I love her. I mean, you're going to get a doctor to come and check me up. Because something must be wrong with me. A man cannot claim to love God if he does not know God. If you are here this morning and you know that you are not born again, that is the very first step. Look, there is nothing to be afraid of, and there is nothing to be shy about. And I'm not going to ask you to raise up your hand. You are going to come outside here. Because it is foolishness to be shameful of what is gainful. Salvation is the most gainful thing on earth. It secures your earthly relevance and guarantees your eternity with God. So if you know that you are here and you are not born again, and you want to be born again, I want you to rush outside now. You have just 30 seconds to do that. And probably you are saying, I'm not sure. You are not born again. Yeah? If you are still checking, I gave my life to Jesus last week Sunday, and I don't know if I've collected my life back again. You have collected it back. Come outside. We have 10 more seconds to do that. If you know that you are not born again and you want to make Jesus the Lord of your life, you want to be called into fellowship with Jesus. The Bible says in the book of Isaiah chapter 40 verse 31, it says that in these last days, it says that the youth will utterly fail. That means human strength will begin to fail. Intellectual strength will fail. It says, but they that wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. There is a special strength that is the exclusive reserve of them that know God, of them that love God. You can be a partaker of this kind of strength if you are acquainted with God. Are you here? You want to give your life to Jesus? You want to say, Jesus, I want to make you the Lord of my life. Look. 5 more seconds. All right, I take it that all of us are saved. I want you to pray this prayer for yourself. The Bible says,